Hey everybody, welcome to our virtual Bible study for the North Hamilton Church of Christ. We are about to explore the answer to a pretty serious question about atheism and our overall study on the existence of God, so stay tuned for that. Before we get into that, I would like to encourage you, if you're a part of our Bible study and you're watching this on either YouTube or Facebook, to do a couple of things for us. Number one, if you're on YouTube, and we appreciate the opportunity to come that way to a lot of people. We have a lot of people who watch on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. Now, what we're trying to do is boost viewership of our videos, and not for the reasons that a lot of people do on YouTube. We're not a monetized channel. We don't make money on our channel. We just want truth to get out, and you can help us by subscribing to our videos, right? So that means that when we drop a new video, if we go live on YouTube, which we do often, you get notifications and you can then view the video, and that helps boost our position in the queue, right? So we don't often make the main page of YouTube, and the more viewers we have, the more opportunity we have for something just like that. So please help us out. Also, give us a thumbs up. That's a pretty quick indicator for us of where our videos are heading. And you can help us a lot by doing that. If you're on Facebook, there are a couple of really important things you can do. One, give us a thumbs up, but also please share the video on your timeline. Go to that share button, hit it, goes to your timeline, and it means that all of the people who are on your friends and family list now have access to that video. And imagine if we all did the same thing, well, there's no telling how many tens of thousands of people we could reach every single week with videos if we all did that. So please help us out. We think we've got something good going on, and we need your help to broadcast the message, all of our messages. But this is a great one, the study of the existence of God. We're really trying to help the world, because the world we're living in now is not as theistic as it used to be. It's more atheistic, agnostic, maybe infidelic even. But there's a lot of professed atheists in our world. We want to try to challenge thinking and talk through things, reason together, and maybe come to a better understanding of the God who does exist. That's what we're trying to do in this particular series. Now, this is lesson number 2. I would encourage you to go back and look at lesson number 1, which is our real formal introduction to the study. We did sort of a precursor to the study about why this is a good study at this particular time in history. But lesson number 1, I think we did it in 2 parts, is our formal introduction. This is lesson number 2. Tonight we are addressing the issue of why people choose atheism. Now, we do have some notes. They are on our website, www.northamiltonchurchofchrist.com. Go there. We try to keep these updated. Sometimes I forget. I have to be reminded by the deacon that's in charge of our social media, hey, I need notes, and we get those uploaded. But you'll see it says something like, why atheism? It'll say here the heading, the existence of God. And then tonight we just have 3 basic questions. But if you'll go and you'll get these questions in advance, it allows you to kind of think through the subject matter before we get to it. Now, if you only study from home, and maybe you're not a member at North Hamilton, right? So there's no way you could be here. Maybe you live in another state, and we do have a lot of people who live outside of Chattanooga area who just aren't here on Wednesday evenings. We have great in-class discussions. So if you're in the area, especially if you're a member, you need to be in services, and we have these 3 questions, and people take these questions home and study them. We just have great in-class study, and that's not televised. It's not on YouTube. It's not on Facebook. So there's a benefit to being in class. And somebody always brings something up that I haven't thought about. They add something to it that I didn't have in my notes, and it helps me, and it helps each other, and we always have great study. But these 3 questions we're working off of, and I may not address them specifically in this particular format, but we do go over these questions in class. In the long debate, let's get into our study tonight, lesson number 2, why people choose atheism. In the long debate that has existed between theists, those are people who believe in God, and atheists, people who do not believe in God, atheists have frequently inquired and I think somewhat rhetorically when they do this, why would any reasonable or rational person believe in a God? Or if they choose creator, they might say, why would any rational person choose to believe in a creator? All right, and I think that's almost a rhetorical question. It's primarily spoken in derision. I think the implication of that is if you believe in God, you're not a reasonable person, which I think to some degree is a way for them to dismiss conversation about God. They say, oh, you believe in God, you're not really a reasonable person. Why would I talk to you? You're not a rational person. But it's meant to suggest, I think, that God and reason are incompatible, that they don't go together, that you really can't talk about God and be a reasonable person, which again I think is dismissive of conversation with a theist because it's a way of saying I'm wasting my time talking to a theist because reason and God don't go together. Now, I know, there may be some, but I'm going to qualify this. When I say I know of no honest theist who refuses the opportunity to explain the rationale behind the existence of God and the evidence for his existence, right? The reasons that we believe in God and the rational ability, the rationale behind that. I know of nobody who refuses that. So I think I am willing to sit down anytime and talk to anybody about anything and my reasons for believing that. Now, there may come a point in the conversation when, I have done the same thing when I think after conversing with somebody, that person's not honest, and so it's sort of a waste of time to talk with dishonest people. But until that part is proven, I'll talk to anybody. And I think that's true of any theist. I don't think any honest theist would refuse sitting down and saying, here are the reasons that I believe in God. Here's the rationale for that. The interesting thing is that the burden of proof in any conversation where there's incompatibility, right, where there's two views that are in opposition to each other, the burden of proof rests on both sides of the debate, not just one, right? So an atheist doesn't get to say, well, you have all the burden of proof. No, if you're saying that there is no God, then you also have a burden of proof. And so both parties come to the table and they have an obligation to prove that their premises are true. Now, the question that is so often put to a theist strikes an equally deep and reflective chord when you apply it to the rationale for atheism. I mean, truthfully, why are some people atheists? Right? So that's the question they ask us. Why are you a theist? Why do you believe in God? I don't care to answer that. But why are some people atheists? And that's what we want to explore tonight. This particular segment of our study, before we actually, again, we've got a couple of things to do before we get to the actual, here is the proof for God's existence. We're just laying some groundwork. And one of the things we wanted to explore is this, why people choose atheism. Next lesson, we're going to take a look at, we're going to sort of examine the ideas, the arguments behind the God delusion from Richard Dawkins, which is a very popular, almost a manifesto for atheism, and it's very popular. I realize the book's been out for a while, but it's still the go-to for a lot of people. And people, they, whoever it is, the podcasters or somebody that's very influential, and they say, this is the reason I don't believe in God, and so they sway a lot of people. But I just want to look particularly at that work next week. I found a website sometime back, and I'm not going to list the website, and you contact me, and I'll be glad to give it to you. It's hard to say all the dots and slashes and hash marks and stuff in here, but there's a website in which they offer from an atheist perspective, right, from the atheistic mindset, why atheism makes sense. And they listed 8 reasons. I'm going to list 6 of the reasons in my notes tonight. And then, again, if you want more information on this website or the full 8 reasons, call me, send me an email. I'll be glad to send that to you. I'm not trying to hide anything. It's just for time's sake, I can't do it. And it's difficult for me to go ... / mark this, that. That's just a difficult thing to do. So here are these reasons, and I'm only listing them for a reason. There's a reason for this, and we want to talk about what we believe are the reasons that people choose atheism, the real reasons that people choose it. There's something embedded in these 6 reasons, and I want you to listen carefully. I'm going to read these. I'm going to try to go slow enough that you can hear them, but listen to what's unspoken in these reasons. All right, number 1, reason for atheism. Religion is harmful. Notice where they start. Religion is harmful because it claims knowledge of an absolute truth about what it is to be human. By definition, such a claim is dangerous. Now, I'm quoting from the website. It leads to immoral decision-making and excludes new insights into what it is to be human, end quote. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time going through each of these arguments, but I would say, if you listen to that, where they say that claim is dangerous, it leads to immoral decision-making. To say a claim is dangerous, interestingly, is to lay a claim to absolute truth. Right? There has to be a standard by which you judge something to be dangerous. When they say that this is defined as, when they say immoral decision-making, that has to be defined, because to claim that something is immoral decision-making appeals to a standard of morality that can only pronounce something to be immoral, right? They're saying religion it leads to immoral decision-making. That's a claim to an absolute. We're going to see this when we examine these arguments. We're going to get into the inherent contradiction of being against God and against His truth, and then claiming something similar in order to denounce what is reality. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, religion blocks, and it's interesting how all of these are supposed to be arguments for atheism, but they're anti-religion. So religion blocks, number 2, quote, the development of rationalism as the guiding principle of human development, end quote. Number 3, quote, religion hinders the development of scientific knowledge, end quote. And we'll see a lot of that where the claim is that science and truth, religious truth, are incompatible, that the belief in the existence of God and science are incompatible. They already do it with creationism and evolution, but it's just sort of a byproduct of this. Number 4, quote, religion gives a distorted view of reality by claiming false things to be true, end quote. And again, you can't claim that without also claiming some sort of knowledge of an absolute in order to make that claim. If atheism distorts reality, then it's also untrue because its claims are false. So that works both ways, right? So what we're doing is we're both appealing to absolutes. We just have to figure out how to discern that. I always think of Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 7, where he says, the legs of the lame are not equal. That there's something to be said about being honest in the examination of arguments. You can't claim an absolute to deny absolutes. You see the absurdity of that? So anyway, it would be easy for me to chase rabbits here and reflect on that too much. Number 5, quote, religion creates and reinforces rifts between communities. It spreads from generation to generation like a computer virus and perpetuates these rifts over many generations, end quote. And then finally, number 6, and I'm only, again, quoting 6 of the 8 that are on that website. Religion discourages the development of democratic systems, of government freedom of expression, and the evolution of society. Now, if we are very careful in our analysis of just the ones we quoted from that website, we find that the abandonment of theism, right? The jettisoning of belief in God is for more than just what they claim incompatibility with facts. In fact, it's not even about that, really. They may sort of remotely suggest that, but that list that I read, and those aren't mine. Those aren't my. I'm not an atheist, right? These are from atheists as to why they believe in atheism. This is why they should believe in atheism. It's really an attack on a religion. What they're obviously concerned with are the fruits of religion, are the fruits of theism, morally and politically the fruits of that. And it really becomes not so much about evidence. They're admitting that in their argumentation. It really becomes, with atheism, a rejection of the consequences of believing in God. All right, so we're going to talk about that in just a minute. I would suggest there are several reasons that people end up denying God and treading the path of atheism. One I would suggest is what they claim is the rational reason or the rational basis for advocating atheism or for rejecting theism. It's tough, sometimes we say atheism or the rejection of theism. I don't know that those are always, they go together, but you understand what I mean when I say that. Okay, so I'll sometimes offer one or the other, but essentially, I don't know how many. I guess let me explain. I don't know how many dedicated, and I mean like convinced atheists there are, as much as there are just people who don't like religion in the world. But I use that term. I'm going to use it the same way. When I refer to an atheist, sometimes I'm just talking about people who don't like God, the idea of God or the restraints that come from God, and they might be just more opposed to religion than they are really truly convinced by evidence that there's no God, because there's no evidence to suggest there is no God. All the evidence is in favor of God. Okay, you see how easy it is for me to chase rabbits. I'm sorry about that. This is it's a deep subject matter, and it's easy for me I get in my mind. It's hard for me to come back to what I'm saying. So if I ramble, I'm trying not to do that. Okay. The rational reason. There are atheists who say it is rational to deny the existence of God. It's the only reasonable course that we have as human beings is to reject this fairy tale of God. There have been a lot of writings over the years, and I would suggest that you go and read some where people say, these are the reasons why anybody would believe in anything. This is not about the atheism or theism debate. This is just about why do we believe what we believe? And ultimately it comes back to we mostly believe what we believe because there's some sort of rationale for it. Now, it may not be true. The rationale may not be true. But we come back to this question where we started, I think, a couple of weeks ago of should belief be founded on something? And the answer is yes. Now, what it is that we should believe and the way it is founded is explained in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. This is a go-to verse for us. We're going to, in about probably 3 weeks, we're going to really explore this idea of faith according to Scripture. Faith according to Scripture. And all the words that are synonymous to that in the New Testament. So let's talk about this for just a second. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Right, so included in that would be God, because verse 3 he says, by faith, and he's just explained how we come to a knowledge of those things in verse 1. Evidence founds our belief. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. So our belief in God is not just because. It's not just, well, what are the two options and which one is the best of the two viable options. That's not how we do that. We take and we put disbelief in God and belief in God in either hand, and we weigh the evidence and we say, you know what, there is evidence to believe in God. That's what Hebrews 11:1 is suggesting, is that faith is built on evidence. So there may be some who are convinced that what they believe is based on evidence. If the evidence is not true, then what they believe is not true. See, that's the whole point we're making about this idea of rationale. That's why we're debating evidence right? So we're examining arguments, but we're also debating the evidence behind the arguments. It was David Hume, right, who said that the wise man ought to proportion his belief to the evidence. I agree with that. You will not agree with Hume on what he ultimately concluded, but what he said was true. And so both sides have to be able to say, let's be honest with the evidence, right? I agree with that sentiment, just not where he ended up at. If what a person advocates as a belief is based on an evidence that is actually not evidence at all, then that person believes something untrue because the evidence is untrue. And that proves that we have to analyze more than just the argument itself. And I think that's what happens in this debate, is that there are a lot of atheists who pride themselves on these huge syllogisms that sound really technical and they're very geeky. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because I'm geeky about some things. When it comes to the Bible, I'm really geeky about the Bible, right? I'm nerdy about Scripture. But that's not what proves something to be true, is how sincerely I believe something or how technical I make it sound. That's not what makes something true. So beliefs have to be analyzed as systems, not as an isolated tenet, right? So we have to look at the whole thing. And let me give you an illustration of that help make sense, okay? Let's say that you know a salesman, and maybe if you're listening, maybe some of you are salesmen. And in our congregation, we have some guys that work in sales. Let's say you have a salesman come in and he makes his pitch, whatever it is. He's trying to sell, and we have one person here who used to sell parts for just about any kind of engine you could have, anything in a factory, that motor, anything, bearings, all that stuff. Let's say he goes in and he makes his pitch and the company declines his pitch, the one pitch that he makes to that company. Does that make him a bad salesman? Not necessarily. He might be. Maybe he's a bad salesman. But you can't evaluate his success as a salesman based on one pitch, right? Or if you go into the doctor's office, right? You sit down in the doctor's office, you sit on the examining table, and the nurse or even the doctor himself takes your blood pressure, and your blood pressure is high, a little higher than normal. Does that mean you have a heart condition? You have blood pressure issues? It may, or it could just be your nerves. I tend to do that. When I go into the doctor's office, I don't much care going to a doctor's office. Go if I have to. I just don't care for that. And my heart, I get anxious a little bit sitting in a doctor's office, and my blood pressure runs a little high when they put a blood pressure cuff on me. I just don't like being there. But my blood pressure is good. My cholesterol is good, all that. But it wouldn't seem as though, because when I'm sitting in that position, I seem like so you can't evaluate it based on one thing. You have to look at the overarching circumstances, everything that goes with them. So atheism often will look at one point of theism and off their condemnation of theism, and yet that one point has to be evaluated in the entire context of theism. And so we have to do the same for atheism. Atheism is not scrutinized on one issue, but upon the rationale for the total system of teaching that defines it. If atheism claims to be rational, then what about the claim of atheism and the evidence behind that? The fundamental problem, I think, is that atheism really doesn't have answers to the problem of conceptualization, right? The human mind really can't even understand or detail what is non-existent. See, this is one of the problems I have with atheism, and I hope you have the same problem with atheism. And I promise you, if you're an atheist, I'm not making fun of you personally. No more than I hope that you don't make fun of a theist personally just because you disagree. The argument itself, the claim itself is absurd, okay? Because I am convinced that the mind cannot conceive what does not exist. I think that's the way we're built. That gets back to Psalm 14:1. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. And I've got to keep track of the time. Boy, we're almost out of time. I don't want to linger too much on this. But if I said there is an empty room, there's nothing in this room, it's just totally empty, please explain to me what's in this room. You can't do it. because there's nothing in the room. You can't inject into that room what does not exist in that room. All right? And atheists, I think, make that fatal error in attempting to claim that God does not exist, because in order to do that, you actually have to explain the God whom you then deny. See how that works? If God doesn't exist, you're wasting time talking about him. That's the truth of it. Christopher Hitchens, he made his claim, God is not great. Made all this thing about God is not great. And then that's an impossible claim, because he went on to describe that God doesn't exist. But he explained the greatness of God to then deny the God who is great. And so atheism does that. It's semantically, it is a lie. If God does not exist, how can you say God, a word without any kind of referent, does not exist? Okay? So I think the argument that this is a rational claim and it's based on rationale is simply not true. Now, what are some other reasons? Well, I think one is a moral reason. I think that was admitted in some of the rationale that we read earlier. In Romans chapter 1, if you start in verse 18 and you go down through verse 32 of Romans chapter 1, Paul will talk about people who knew the existence of God, but then denied the existence of God simply because they did not want God part of their knowledge, which means that there are a lot of people in this world, who have a desire for moral independence. That means they deny God not based on evidence, but they deny God based on their desire for freedom, autonomy, which you are anyway. God made you a free moral agent, but their desire is, we don't want any restraints. We want to be free to do whatever we want to do and without fear of consequence. And so I think some of it is, there's a moral reason behind a lot of that. I think some of it has to do with emotion. There is an emotional reason why a lot of people do that, right? Maybe somebody gets angry at God. They've had trauma in their life, or they've had some sort of suffering, and they get angry at God due to life's circumstances, and they deny God based on life's circumstances, not based on there being evidence for a denial of the existence of God. Somebody brought up, we were in class the last time, and somebody we sort of broached the subject, and they started talking about environmental reasons. And I think that's a lot of it, because we get around peers, and we tend to adopt whatever beliefs represent our peers because we want acceptance. And if we're going to be accepted within those peers, we do the same thing. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 33, Paul was talking to people who were Christians, and they ended up denying a future bodily resurrection because evil companionships corrupt good manners. Some of it might be an academic reason. So academically, maybe people in their mind are thinking, hey, you know what? Truth is connected to academic success. And so if I meet a guy or a woman who has 5 PhDs behind their name and he or she denies God, well, they must have the truth because they've got a claim. They've got 5 PhDs behind their name. There tends to be an admiration of that in our world. Read Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Listen to what Solomon says about worldly wisdom. Okay, it's nothing bad in worldly wisdom, but it's not the be-all and end-all of truth. In Matthew chapter 11 and verse 25, Jesus even warned that there's a tendency to sort of lend credit to the wise and the prudent, and we forget about the wisdom of babes. Truth is pretty simple. Truth is. Reality is easy to discern. In 1 Timothy 6 and verse 20, we are even warned against pseudoscience. So it's possible that somebody with multiple PhDs has done like 2 Timothy 3 and verse 7. Maybe they've been ever learning, but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. And so just because you know things doesn't mean those things are true, like we said earlier, right? When we're talking about the rational reason. You can claim something to be evidence and found your belief on that, but that doesn't mean the evidence is true. It has to be examined. So just because you spend a lot of time learning doesn't mean you've come to a knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy 3, verse 7. Maybe family has a lot to do with it. If you're in a non-religious family and you grow up and you're not really connected to religion at all, maybe you have a proclivity. There's a greater tendency to move toward atheism. It doesn't mean, though, that's founded on evidence. Do you see how important evidence is to our belief? And then maybe some of it's ignorance. I think maybe Paul in Acts chapter 11 gives us an illustration of that. When he goes to a group of people and talks to them about the unknown God, they were ignorant of him. And maybe we need to do a better job as theists, people who believe in God, in sharing that truth with the world, especially today when so many people are trending away from theism. So, ultimately, if you put 100 people in a room and they were all atheists, you might have 100 different reasons. I think a lot of it is there is the assumption that atheism is a rational way of thinking, and we disagree with that. It's not rational. The very claim itself to sort of construct the God of the Bible and then to say the God of the Bible doesn't exist. You cannot, none of us can conceive what doesn't exist. If I say, construct in your mind a round square, you can't do it. It's impossible for the mind to conceive what does not exist. Okay? Maybe it's moral. Want to be free from restraints. Maybe it's emotional, environmental, academic. Maybe some of it is foundational, going back to the home. Maybe some of it is ignorance. We don't know all the reasons, but these are some of them. And in the coming weeks, we're going to examine whether or not the claims are entirely rational that say there is no God. So we want to examine that. We want to be sure, 100% sure, that we believe what the evidence leads us to believe and not otherwise. Because otherwise, what would it matter? You can just believe whatever you wanted to believe. Maybe that's some of it too. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you'll check us out. Please share the video. Don't forget to do that. Go to our website, check out the notes, do your own study. I would love to converse with you on this. I'll sit down anywhere. I'll buy you a cup of coffee and we can just chat. I don't care to sit on the front porch of the house or meet you in a coffee shop somewhere. We'll just chat about it because I believe God exists. I believe there's evidence for the existence of God. Here at North Hamilton, we are convinced of that. So please let us know. Hey, until next time, we come back, which will be lesson number 3. I hope you know that God loves you. Even if you don't believe in Him, He still loves you, and I love you too. And I'll see you next time, 7 o'clock, right here next time. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.